What's different domestically with Gore? The green push. That's the big
Yeah,
piece.
I think so. I think a lot of the policies that will be carried over from Clinton because they were popular centrist policies. I think the overall kind of concept of the balanced budget will persist. I don't see President Gore having interest in rocking that boat.
I'm a little hesitant on that because I feel like what we just laid out makes a lot of electoral sense to them. And I could see public investment maybe taking being more important.
Yeah.
These are priorities we have.
We
And
we get off the balanced budget, but that's the reason we're off the balanced budget.
right, the balanced budget to people, to auto workers in Michigan and Ohio, the balanced budget makes sense and it's something they pick up on. But when you see a revitalization, when you see what we're getting for that money, I think people are more okay with a deficit because you're not seeing a trade deficit. You're seeing, people's lives are getting better.
Well, let me ask you this. And so are we actually seeing a persistent deficit, or do we eventually close the gap with increased growth?
Yeah, I think we'll eventually get to it, but I think the messaging and the prioritization are more on public good infrastructures, things that the government only the government can do, putting the money into these things to grow us out of it. And let's be honest, right? Like the deficit, how much does deficit affect people's lives versus good roads, internet, good jobs?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking long term or short term. But yes, I mean, I see what you're saying, and it depends on. I'm going to say with deficits. I mean, I'm not an economist, but I would say with deficit, it depends on what kind of interest rates are you paying on debt, and what does that do to inflation. Mm-hmm. And if the answer to those things is not too bad and not very much, then yeah, deficits in the immediate time period don't matter that much.
So 1994, shifting here but not shifting at the same time. 1994, the Republicans come with the contract with America, right? Mm-hmm. This is their big thing. This is it's a midterm election, which tends to favor the party that's out of favor in the White House. Almost historically, you can almost bet on that, just in a general sense. And the Republicans do take back the House as a result of that. This happens in '96 after the election, so the election results are already set there from what they would have been in the real timeline. But we've described a Gore presidency here that has some foreign policy successes. Of course, we don't know what other curveballs he could have been thrown and what other hijack could have come along under that scenario. Maybe Al-Qaeda doesn't go quietly into that good night, or some other organization pops up and becomes more of a threat, to stability and other things as well. But we basically outlined a Gore presidency that has a couple of foreign policy successes, or at least in terms of how they're viewed internally in the U.S. and maybe globally. Has some benefits that are going maybe economically that they're able to capitalize on because of those foreign policy successes and infrastructure investment and those types of things. So in this alternative timeline, what are the Republicans doing from '96 to 2000? Are they just along for the ride here? In other words, what are their talking points when they have to show up on shows as talking heads during this period of time?
I think they're deficit hawks. And the other thing is, I think they're making the argument of just pointing out how ridiculous Ed Begley Jr. looks trying to drive an electric automobile. They're that kind of mocking about these are just boondoggles about things that aren't really going to pay off for you. Because, we say that technology is going to get there, and I agree, and I think it will get there. But I think a lot of the research hadn't been done, and I think a lot of it would be done over the course of this time period. And I think it's distinctly possible that you don't see the results of that research paying fruition in these 4 years. So I think you do have Republicans saying this is just going back to the tax and spend, and they're just throwing this money at this stuff that, because there's still the argument at this point that climate change isn't real. And so why are we spending all of this money on these things just on a theory?
Well, there's still people that say that, Chris.
Right.
So we talked about this, but we sort of agreed before based upon the foreign policy aspect of things. But I'll just survey the folks I see on the screen right now. The assumption is this leans towards Gore having a fairly easy time winning outright as president in 2000, right?
Yes.
So we sort of agreed upon that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a Gore third term because he has the mini first term that's a result of the ascendancy, but he's within the 10-year rule of the 22nd Amendment. So Gore wins re-election on his own merits in 2000. We talked about the things that may happen during the second Gore term, already been alluded to here, maybe more of this investment, more of that type of thing. Who does he beat in 2000? Is it Bush still coming forward, or is it somebody else who's more we got to put up a nominee, somebody's got to run here kind of thing? Who's going to be 2000's Bob Dole? I guess is my question here.
I think Bush waits till 2004.
I agree. Bush does not run in 2000. In the circumstances we have lined out here, Bush does not run in 2000. Absolutely not.
So who is the Republican nominee in 2000 in this alternative timeline? There has to be one, right?
I mean, it's not a great job under the way we've set this up. I mean, we've set this up very, very much for a Gore victory.
This is, somebody, and again, not to disparage, the senator from the former senator from the late former senator from Kansas or the current living Mitt Romney, but somebody's got to play this role, right? At the end of the day, in terms of stepping up in a midterm when you know that there are, or the second term election for a sitting president when you know there's not much chance of a win.
Do you think McCain would do it?
Well, that's where I was sort of going to go. I think, the interesting thing to me when I try to think of the domestic politics aspect of this is, when you're the party that's the out party, which is what the Republicans, I think, would be or feel like to a great degree during this period of time here, you're looking for a way to get back in. And that's normally when you innovate yourself as a party to some degree. And so I begin to wonder if a Maverick-esque McCain might be a good example of that, or something like McCain is what drives in to say, it's not your dad's Republican. It's not your dad. It's not even the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. This is a different Republican Party. It's not your dad's Buick.
I don't know. The reason I'm a little hesitant on a McCain idea is McCain had a maverick aspect to him, but he also had foreign policy chops to spare. And I think not to, I think in the scenario we outlined, even somebody who, to most of our American listeners are going to sit there and say, I'm a little hesitant to even think about this, but man, Al Gore, to the modern American, Al Gore has a little bit of a wimp factor to him in the way a Dukakis might have. This Al Gore doesn't. This Al Gore has some serious wins under his belt. And so I don't know if a McCain is the best, because you're not really playing to you're kind of playing into some strengths there that the other side has.
Do you let Quayle run just because? I'm looking at who withdrew before the primary election.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got a different name.
Lamar Alexander?
No. Steve Forbes.
Okay.
Totally. Don talks about reinventing the Republican Party.
Yep.
Holy smokes, when that reinvent,
yeah,
would be very different.
And to me, that's what's interesting is sort of, we talk about sometimes whether, our forks have tails. What happens the further out you get is that uh, this is this is an inflection period in American politics, because the argument can be set in the real timeline. Again, we talked about the fact that we're willing to be more political because we can do so in a respectful way, and we ask our listeners to understand we're doing this in a respectful way. Is that the Clinton presidency in the real timeline for me sets up the Bush presidency, which sets up the Obama presidency in terms of the beginning of what we have. That's the divisiveness that goes back and forth. Not that those individuals themselves were necessarily divisive, but their parties became more divisive towards each other because of those personalities being in play there and the events that went on around them. If you have this unexpected change, because that's what the assassination of Clinton in '96 would have been. This was unexpected. He had just been reelected. This was not what people had voted for, right? This is not. Granted, yes, it's his vice president, so it is what they voted for, but it's not. I do think you have the chance of really just shaking up the whole picture and what we know of being the last 25 to 30 years of American politics is very different as a result of this, because as somebody said, you don't have wimpy Gore in 2000, in terms of the perception that's there.
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult to imagine that beyond 2000, you don't see probably a successful Democratic run in 2004, just for no other reason than that party's been in office for 12 years and things tend to shift back, right? Mm-hmm. So what challenges the Democrats in 2004 either is something that's Bush-esque, but I don't think that's the case because it's a different context now all of a sudden, or it's something completely different, a Steve Forbes, or again, what a McCain would be, or somebody I can't even think of here. I can see Romney, coming forward early as a different kind of candidate, in that scenario. But I just think it's different, I guess is my point. I know I waffled around there. I just feel like it's different.
I want to say two things. First, both MSNBC and Fox News were founded within a year of our fork. So yep. I am going to go ahead and say, I feel like that bifurcation of American news media does lead to similar divisiveness to where we are. I think the fault lines look a little different, but I think it leads to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, does the hardcore push for the green and invest at the green at any cost, which we all agree tends to move heavier, does that fire up and become more your dividing line? Now, and I'm speaking as someone who works for an oil company. Mm-hmm. So, I will throw that out because that tends to get, even today, I laugh when they try to offer me a Tesla when I'm landing in Oklahoma City to drive to the oil refinery. And I'm like, not on your life. Am I going to drive a Tesla to an oil refinery?
From the other side of this, as somebody that works for a labor union, and when I get a car on work travel, have to look around for an American-made car because I can't show up to my places in
you feel
a Toyota. I think my world may be a little bit closer to this, because I think if you look at what happened today, or what has happened since '96, you had a real perception in Ohio and in Pennsylvania that the Democrats are the party of Teslas and of solar panels on your roofs and of all of these things that are very different from us. And I think the Gephardt effect of having the green, that green-blue alliance tied down keeps the blue wall.
Keeps those
people
and on some level, the Rust Belt doesn't decay to the point that it has.
Right.
At this point.
Yeah.
So you get a complete different look there. Absolutely.
You have a Democratic Party that has serviced those areas. Now, what I think you will see is, if you look at, we're recording this July 28th, so maybe it will have changed by the time you hear this. Now after some of the changes that happened on the Democratic side, they're saying, okay, now we're trying to win North Carolina and Georgia. I think those are laughable in our scenario. I think demographically, the South stays more solidly Republican and the Rust Belt stays more solidly Democrat.
Your battleground states definitively change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. To a Gephardt Democrat, the fact that we're fighting in Wisconsin and Michigan is laughable.
Yeah, I could see that.
So I think one of the things you have is, I think what you would see is in 2004, and Bush came out and explicitly talked about this, but let's be honest about this, people. Clinton wasn't impeached in our timeline about this stuff, but the affair comes out. And there is still that sense that the Democrats aren't the rock-ribbed, the religious party. And I think that is the angle that the Republicans pick up.
So you get, just gonna throw this out there again.
Sure.
We're gonna hit it, current politics because we can't avoid it because it's informed by how we got to where we are in past politics as well. Does some of the things that we see the American Republican Party publicly stand for today come earlier as a result of this, Chris? Is that what you're suggesting there in response to that, or is it a different flavor? Is it a kinder, gentler version of that than what we have today?
Almost a conservative with a conscience. Is that? I mean, wasn't that exactly what Bush said?
That's exactly what Bush said.
Compassionate conservatism. He put his faith front and center as what he was running on, and I think that very well plays with what's out there for a politician in 2004 looking for,
Yeah, we'll start bringing this around to a close. We'll probably come back to it in slightly different ways. But the reason I asked that question, the reason that's important to me, again, I've already said it here, is that 9/11 was a watershed moment in terms of how it's impacted everything that, we think of the world. I think of the world this way when I was an adult, before 9/11 and after. We say post 9/11 all the time because it's real. That's not just some arbitrary dividing line. It's a real what things were before and what they're after. I think we would be talking about, I don't remember the exact date. We would be talking post 96. We would have we may know the date the same way we do 9/11 in a slightly different way. It's not the same way of having symbols of America, being directly attacked by planes. It's not the same thing because you don't have the visuals in the same way that you do, most likely here. But you have pictures of what the assassination site looked like and other things like that. You would have those.
You
visuals.
had the mangled beast.
Yeah, you have that, but you have that and you don't have that. But that was the watershed. So you move the watershed 5 years earlier with a slightly different context. The ripples for this are big. And I think the ripples for this are that they do change how the parties are going at each other. And again, back to my point about Bush, let's say he is the candidate in 2004, because I don't think he's the candidate in 2000 because it doesn't make sense to run in 2000. You're the sacrificial lamb in 2000 if you're the Republican nominee. Is that my take on George W. Bush, whether I'm right or wrong, it is my take, is he thought he could go to Washington and do the same thing that he did in the state of Texas. And I watched him do it in the state of Texas, which was work with a Democratic lieutenant governor and a legislature that was much more bipartisan and do things. Whether you liked what he did or didn't like what he did, they did things. And I think he thought he could go to Washington and do that. And it didn't happen that way. It just didn't happen that way because of 9/11. And so, my question becomes, is there a different feel by the time you get to 2004? And I think you're going to see a change in which party controls the White House. But what thrusts them to there? Is it because of an economic downturn? Is it because of look at how much our deficits have ballooned with all this investment. Yeah, we understand why we're investing it, but look at now what we have to do, or we're going to be going into deeper debt, or look what happened to my taxes as a result of all this investment. I do think you're likely to see a 2004 Republican nominee that runs on the traditional anti-tax and spend platform of, that's great. Yeah, some of this infrastructure is great. We needed to invest it, but hold on here. Let's don't spend money we don't have, kind of thing. I think that would be the more traditional way that it would play out without the context of all the 9/11 foreign policy things that were there, if that makes any sense.
I could easily see that.
And I think as a result of that, the thing that pops to my mind is when and how does a Barack Obama show up, in this scenario? Because you've changed the dynamics from the real timeline that almost begged for a persona like a Barack Obama to come to the forefront. I mean, where does that happen in this scenario?
Help my memory, because I did not participate. Did Hillary lived, right?
Yeah. Under this scenario, Hillary was already in Thailand, as I recall, when the incident happened.
She's your 2004 Democrat nominee, and you don't get Barack Obama.
Well, you don't get him. You don't get him as president. You don't get him as president.
Yeah, you get him in. He is the senator from Illinois, and he will serve as a senator from Illinois until at least 2000. Maybe you get him in 2008 when we had him, but not until after you have a second Clinton presidency, because I think she engenders. She lets Al have his time. But when Al's time is done,
I think she runs in 04 and gets creamed in 04.
You think so?
I agree. It's been 12 years of Democratic administration. I just, it's the pendulum. It swings to one direction or another, and it is hard for me, even if the second term ends up pretty successfully, it is hard for me to see a Democrat win for the fourth term in a row. So I agree. I think she gets nominated. I think she gets clobbered, and it could be Bush. I mean, I think that's a real possibility.
Or McCain or Romney or any of the other cast of characters that could come along here. But
I think it's not gonna be I don't think it's gonna be somebody that is a fringe candidate in any way. I think you can McCain. Yes, he has a reputation as being a maverick. I think that maverick reputation is mostly about how he communicates. I think if you look at his politics, I think he's a moderate Republican. I mean, I don't think there's anything too confusing about McCain. And so I think it's just a matter of, do you want somebody that's a little more on the conservative side with like Bush, or do you want somebody that is more moderate, which could be McCain or Romney, to be honest with you?
I think it's a Bush. I think it's George W. Bush, because
I favor him too in this case.
Because, especially once Clinton comes out and is obviously running, you want him running against her. I think he's much more charismatic. I think he has an easy ability to connect. And I think what you look at when you see a party that has been out of power for an extended period of time, a lot of times they're picking like Eisenhower. They're picking somebody to bring us back together. Somebody that can really unite us, that hasn't been running again and again and again. So I think that is what the Republicans do. And the name factor just, can't hurt.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, as we sort of draw this to a close, and we will come back and revisit this. At some point, I want to hear Dylan Holzheimer's thoughts on this as well. If nothing else, we'll certainly pick it up in our listener review. That's the nice thing about doing that. Every once in a while, we get a chance to come back and revisit. I do think eventually you have a George W. Bush as president. The timeline is different. I do think you have either Barack Obama or someone like him that then becomes the counter to that. It's just things get pushed further back in this scenario more than anything else. And I also, maybe it's just the hopeful part of me that believes there's always going to be the divisiveness, but it doesn't quite get as divisive by the time we get to 2024 in this revised timeline as we have in 2024 today in American politics, just because it's taken a slightly different path to get there and didn't go through the earlier Bush presidency with the extra baggage that came along because of 9/11. Maybe I'm totally
and what I want to explore when we come back to this is what happens in 2007, 2008. So now, which would be under a Bush's first term. I mean, I think we're kind of aligning that way. I would argue that very little has likely changed in terms of the setup for why the housing crisis happened.
100% exact. Has
it was
someone
because it was bipartisan. It was very much bipartisan, and
Yep.
and if you want to, I mean, you could, and I would encourage everybody to both read the book The Big Short and watch the movie. They're both great. But they squarely lay the blame on everybody. Like,
Yep.
It is not one party. It is, yeah.
I would add to the HBO movie Too Big to Fail. William
Yeah.
Hurt has the Secretary of Treasury, and speaking as someone who was an AIG employee in 2008, while his wife served as a managing paralegal, basically running the law office of the foreclosure firm in Texas that was doing 800 plus foreclosures per month in 2008. Yes, the setup was the same.
It was the same, and so I think it would happen very similarly. So you probably have a one-term President Bush.
Yes,
because I think it is unlikely that in that scenario he is going to get reelected in 2008. Does he deserve all the blame for that? Absolutely not.
Doesn't matter. He's in the chair.
Yeah. Will he get the blame? Absolutely.
Yeah. Herbert Hoover was a civil engineer who was trained in relief and was responsible for keeping Germany from collapsing after World War I. Those are historical facts. If you're an American listening to this, that is not what you think when you hear Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, everybody thought that Hoover was just asleep at the switch, and that's not fair. We can disagree with the things that he did, but he was not asleep at the switch doing nothing.
Right. Guys, this is why I like doing this. We started with one place and we went to places I had no idea we were going to go, but it's with people I like and it's with people who think and are willing to say what they think, which is all good stuff there. So if you've enjoyed this, if you're a listener, we appreciate you. We always want to say that we thank you. We invite you, by the way, to go to our Discord server and disagree with us as much as you want to. We just ask that you do it with some civility because we probably missed something. We definitely probably got something wrong in this because of the facts that are there. So keep us straight when it comes to that, but also engage with us. By now, you would have heard the first of our episodes where we come back and revisit topics. So know that if you put your opinions there, we're going to come back around to them, and we're going to talk about them again. So even more reason to do so. And I'm just really hoping we get some. It's almost become a Chris thing now. We have to call out Helena Nash on our Discord server. She's going to write some wonderfully beautiful prose, I bet, in response to this. That much I can probably go to the bank on.
There is a 100% chance that she's going to write some wonderful prose about this.
So I'm anxious to read what that is. And if you don't know what we're talking about, that's even more reason for you to go check us out on the Discord server and see what happens there when we get the feedback that's there. So on behalf of Chris and of Robert and of Eric, we want to say thanks once again for joining us here on A Fork in Time. And by the way, we'll be back. We'll show up in your podcast feed next week too. So we hope you join us then. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.